Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you're all well on this fantabulous Friday. We made it to the end of the week. It's Friday, and I'm so excited. Well, I'm not because I don't really get weekends off, but it's Friday, so look, it's been a long week. There's been a lot happening. What with Bryan COULD coming forward, what with the prosecution's case looking very brittle, and look, it raises some questions, and it's one of those questions that I'm going to address in this video. But before I do, let me just say that you look absolutely amazing, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend, whatever it is that you're doing. But anyway, let's get straight into the meat and potatoes, as this is going to be a controversial video, but I feel that it's a video that makes sense. Something that it's not alien to us to speak about it, but I think that when you take into consideration all of the fuckery that's going on around the Idaho 4 case, it's about time that we took a bit of a look at some things, okay? And that is that in the event that Bryan COULD didn't do this crime, someone else did. And that's just the way it is. And whether people want to put their head in the sand and ignore it, it's just the way it is. It goes hand in hand with Bryan COULD not being the person who did this, someone else did. And the biggest question of all is, if Bryan didn't do it, then who did? Even when you're somebody who the guilt has turned around and say, oh, you're a pro-burger, then who did it? You know, it's not our job to work out who did it. It's law enforcement's job to work out who did it. But I think it's safe to say that the law enforcement around this, they're pretty sure that it's Bryan COULD, that they want to be punished for this crime. But before we take a bit of a dark turn, and before I do that as well, let me just premise this by saying, this is my opinion. Just my opinion. It has no bearing in anything whatsoever other than people have opinions. You have opinions. You who are watching this video, you have an opinion. You'll either agree with me, you'll not agree with me, and that's cool. I don't expect everybody to agree with me. Certainly not what I'm going to speak about in this video. But it's important to understand that nobody we speak about in this is guilty or confirmed as innocent of anything. You know, it's at this moment in time, in the eyes of the law, not one single person around the Idaho 4 case is guilty of doing this in the eyes of the law. There is a process to go through, and that process is showing us that that process has cracks in it. And those cracks are leading to questions. And there is elements of this case that is purposefully being hidden for the purpose of, if it's not hidden, then it will look bad on the prosecution. And the biggest question around that is, why is it that the defense team, over a year and a half after the crime, have not handed over the very evidence to support what was stated within the PCA, which was the foundation for the arrest of Bryan COULD? Make that make sense. Because to me, it just doesn't. But anyway, back to it. If you do not believe that Bryan COULD committed this crime, then you will probably have some ideas over who you think could have done it. And we all have theories. We've looked at the frat theory. I think that the frat theory holds weight because of my own personal experience around people who have been delving in the worlds of steroidal use and steroid use. I don't know why I just made up a word there, but steroid use. And it's, how can I say it? It's a very real problem. A very real problem. When someone is triggered and they are on steroids, there is a very real possibility that they can hurt people. But the frat theory does come with issues. It does come with issues, and some people have pointed that out. And they're not necessarily pro-burgers or anti-Bryan burgers. You know, they're just people who are like me. They have a critical mind, and they look at things and think certain things. And the frat theory would mean a lot of people being quiet. So could you guarantee that everybody be quiet? And for that reason, you have to, I suppose, believe that if the frat had something to do with it, then nobody external to that would have known about it. Nobody whatsoever. Nobody caught wind of it, and it was something that perhaps a small amount of people knew about, and a small people were able to retain that information. But let's not forget that the fight started at the frat house, and there would have been multiple people there. They would have known that there was this fight, any issues, and whatever. So I feel that does have a lot of moving parts, and the more moving parts there are, then the more fragility there is to that case. And the frat theory, even though I do feel it holds a lot of weight because of my own personal experiences with it, I do feel that there is a degree of fragility that means that it couldn't be absolutely solid. Would it hold up? We do know that they're still doing these things. The fraternity or footballers, the vandals, these groups are still going around and they are attacking students. So there is a how can I say, there is a culture of violence around this university. And that kind of goes hand in hand with some of the other theories that have been on the back burner about, was this a retaliation for perhaps someone who lost their life and it was passed off as something that it was not, and someone took retaliation. That is, again, something that means motive and opportunity. That motive section has always been missing with respect of Bryan Kohberger. There just doesn't seem to be a real motive, and that is why it seems that they're very, very strong in pushing and what I mean by pushing it, I think this is the most interesting point, is it doesn't necessarily now seem to be the legal representation that are pushing stalking, not even the prosecution having withdrawn that, because obviously they haven't been able to prove it, and they know that Anne hasn't seen any proof of it, so it gets to a point where they're caught between the devil and deep blue sea. They know that that's valuable in order to keep in their arsenal, but if they haven't handed over any proof this far down the track to prove it to the defence, then the defence are going to call that out, and you can't hide that from the public. Well, you can in this case, but you know what I mean? Eventually it's going to come to light, and in effect it did with these surveys being sent out. But the locals, the people around this, are now starting to reinvigorate that claim. That was something that was originally exacerbated by the Gonsalves family and recently given a reignition by the integration of Ashlyn Couch into the story again. And lo and behold, we have the stalking thing, the stalking narrative coming up. And I do feel that could potentially be diversionary. And does that somehow hold weight to a retaliation type crime? Or again, is that somehow connected to something else that we've spoken about on the peripherals, perhaps narcotic connection, or again, the frat brothers? Again, that's something to put on the back burner. But something that I just cannot let go of, and I cannot seem to drop, is Brent Kopacker. And what I will say, first of all, is Brent Kopacker, he is a hero. He went out to war, and he served his country. He was a Purple Heart soldier. And yes, a hero. But sadly, and the tragedy of the military is many of these soldiers come back, and they're not the same person when they come back as when they went out. They are a very, very different person. The wars that they see, the things that they're involved in, the loss, the destruction, the devastation, forever changes them. And people want to protect the person that went out to the war. They want to protect that person. But you can't protect the person and ignore the person that they could have become. So if you put up Bryan Kohberger against Brent Kopacker, with Bryan Kohberger, I do feel that there is still this round peg, square hole. And in order to make Bryan Kohberger fit, you have to take things from mainstream media. Some of these things that they've said, the incel, the narcissistic, the setting cameras up and spying on people, the things what people say about his eyes, even they've gone as far as to say he's a cannibal. And they're taking these elements of these stories and putting them together. They go on about segregation of the rubbish into his neighbours like he was hiding something. I do that. I've done it. I do it all the time. I'm actually in the process of, I do it every other Monday, utilising the neighbour's bin, because we just use too much and the neighbours hardly use theirs. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not a murderer. I suppose what I'm saying is that people are making mountains out of molehills. They're making mountains out of molehills, and they're having to do that to make Bryan Kohberger fit. But if you strip away all of the noise, what are you left with? You're left with a PhD student who seems to be a bit of a loner, he's just someone who's moved across country to study in something that he's been studying and wants to progress in, that he has an interest in, he has an active interest in. He's a runner, he's a hiker. He's got interest in going out and hiking these trails. That's what you get. But on the flip side of that coin, with Brent Kopacker, what do you have? You have a guy who went out to war and came back seemingly damaged. And it would get to the point where he is in a confrontation with law enforcement and he is executed. And during that execution, because that's what it was an execution, he had made claims, there were claims made that he was holding students hostage. But that was never confirmed. It was never seen. There was never any interviews done that I can see that absolutely clarifies that. And in fact, the body cam footage that we've seen doesn't even show them. It doesn't show anybody apart from Brent Kopacker alone. And the statements that he makes about roommates, some have asked, quite rightfully, what was he actually saying about roommates? Was he rarely referencing his own roommates and hurting his roommates, or was he talking about other roommates and the hurt that they sustained? Around the time when all this kicked off, there was things uploaded on his social media that was coordinates, and people speculated as to whether that was a message. Was he sending out, this is where you need to go to find perhaps the weapon that was used in Idaho? And again, it was speculation, but it was removed. It was very quickly removed. Instead of explaining what it was, nobody addressed it. They just removed it, dropped it, and removed social media. Got rid of it. Off. Gone. Done. Done and dusted. Can't discuss it anymore. But Brent Kopacker was a soldier. He had an interest in bladed weapons. He knew how to use them. When you factor in what happened at 1122 King Road, what do you want? Do you want to believe that a PhD student went in here and clumsily done this crime to the fact where he dropped his knife sheath there? But nobody heard it because it was so quick, it was so silent, he was in, out, and gone. Or is there another potential? And I've touched on this before. When you put Bryan Kohberger and Brent Kopacker into this crime, there is one of them that fits beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Someone who went away and come back damaged. They had skill, they had access to weapons, and they would have had the ability to go into a home undetected, do this crime quickly, swiftly, efficiently, and get away. Now the question is did he do it on his own? Or is there some connection in the background to someone else? Who knows? But again, I only bring this question up again because with the latest things that we are seeing in the Idaho 4 case, I personally do not feel that the door is closed upon another possibility. And I've asked myself a question as to if law enforcement, if they wanted to frame Bryan Kohberger, for instance, if this was a frame job, why would you risk that if there was a potential for this to happen again, if there was a killer out there? So you've got two ways of looking at that, and that is either they're willing to take that risk because their belief is this person's not going to be stupid enough to commit the crime again when someone's been pegged for it. You could consider whether law enforcement knows who it is. There's been a discussion, and it's an even bigger cover-up. It's covering up because they know who did it. Or they just know that there isn't going to be a recurrence. They absolutely know there isn't going to be an occurrence. And let's not forget, people say about the knife sheath being planted. Bryan can't dispute that. He couldn't dispute it. Even if Bryan Coburg was the person who did it and he knows he didn't leave a knife sheath in there, he couldn't say that. He couldn't turn around and say, well, I know you planted the sheath because I did the crime and I didn't leave one there because I never had one. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of things here that operates in a manner that they can't be argued. But to me, again, you've either got to believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Bryan Coburg did this crime and believe that you've seen enough facts and you're willing to ignore all the things that are there and say Bryan Coburg did this crime beyond a reasonable doubt and he deserves to be executed. Or you've got to understand that if you are not there with that, then you must be there with there has got to be a potential alternative. And if there is a potential alternative, then who is that alternative? And who in all of this makes the absolute most sense when you factor in all of the elements that it would take here to make one of them fit? And like I say, even down to if law enforcement did, it might be a stretch, it might be a reach, but it's possible. If they did plant that sheath because they knew that Bryan Coburg was just someone who wouldn't be able to prove his innocence in alignment with Idaho state rules, like the alibi situation, he wouldn't be able to prove. They knew that. They had a conversation with him that is not on camera, so behind the scenes had a conversation. They knew that he was fucked. And they knew there wasn't going to be a recurrence because they knew, for instance, Brent Kopacker wasn't going to be able to kill anyone again. They knew. And before I go, people will turn around and say, well, why didn't they just say it was Brent Kopacker? Because again, you've got a bigger issue would arise from that. Soldiers being sent to war and come back and they are broken people. And those broken people are then turned into weapons that cause this. And that would lead to a big amount of eyes going back onto the military, going back onto that situation and saying, how was this soldier allowed to get into this situation? And again, there's always a reason why it's better to go down that route than it is to go down that one and have to explain something. And again, maybe I'm wearing a tinfoil hat. Let me know down below. And I'll catch you all in the next one.